Okay, this is going to be a very basic tutorial on Kivy layouts. I'm going to start with the box layout because it's very straightforward. Excuse me. First of all, I want you to be able to follow along with me in your IDE or code editor of choice. So, first of all, I'd like you to open two windows or tabs in your editor. One is for the main.py file, and the other is for a Kv file. We're going to be using Kv because I feel that once it's going to be quite simple. First of all, I'm going to go through it slowly. But once you learn to use Kv with Kivy, as it's meant to be used, it's going to make your life a lot simpler. So I promise this won't be difficult. I'll go through it slowly, and I'd like you to set up your Kv file with this line at the top. You need this line at the top of your Kv file. So pause the video or whatever you need to do to get that set up, and we will begin. This line here in my Python file, I'm on Ubuntu Linux, so I just tend to have that at the top of pretty much every Python file, whether it's almost needed or not. You can ignore that, basically. So I'm going to get started, and I'd like you to follow along with me. So we're going to start off by importing Kivy, of course, and then from Kivy UIX, from Kivy app, import app, and from Kivy UIX widget, import widget. This is all we're going to need for the moment. I'm going to start from the bottom up because that's kind of how this works. If name equals main, well, our first class is going to be called myApp. I'm going to call this myApp, so we're going to say myApp run and create that class myApp, subclassing app. So this is going to be our app. The build method we'll call our app, and we're going to call. I'm going to create a widget up here called. I'm just going to call it main widget, which subclasses widget. So it's basically, that means main widget is a widget. Okay, just put pass there for the moment. And so our build method down here is going to call and return main widget, like so. So here's our basic setup here for our Python file, which must be called main.py, by the way. I've called my Kv file my.kv because it's the sort of standard behavior here is to have this class that subclasses app to have app at the end of its name. You don't have to, apparently, but you know, it's what seems to be done, so I'm going to do it too. And the Kv file needs to be called whether or not you have that app bit there. Your Kv file needs to be called the same as this bit here. So that's why mine is called my.kv. These are really subjects for a different tutorial. Just do it for now, basically. Okay, in the main widget here, I'm not going to do anything for now because I'm going to do all the laying out in this file, the Kv file. And so we're going to begin by taking main widget, by making a reference to that in our Kv file. So here we go, main widget. Now, there it is. Main widget when you see a widget between angle brackets like this in the Kv file, it means it's a root widget. Root widgets are always at the very left of the file as well, because the way this works is, right, so we've got main widget here, our root widget. I'm going to put a box widget, or a box layout inside. You see, notice the indentation. Anything that goes inside main widget, which is our root widget for this tutorial, anything that goes inside it will be indented. Okay. Note the colon there, and after box layout. Inside box layout, I am going to put one button. So again, notice the indentation. Each as one moment, let me just enter my button, and I'm going to give the button a text on it that says button 1. Okay, so we have our root widget here between the angle brackets at the leftmost side. It's our root widget. Within the root widget, main widget, we have our box layout. So this box layout is now a child. This is the terminology. It's now a child of main widget. And in turn, this button here is now a child of our box layout, simply because, you know, it's inside our box layout. And you can see that very clearly by the indentation we've got going on here. It's the same with, you know, the indentation that's used in Python to show you that, for instance, this build method is within the myapp class here. Instead of saying it's a child function of the myapp class, we say it's a method of the myapp class. But it's kind of the same idea. Anyway, so we have one button in here, and I can actually run this now. I'm just going to save everything. Let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so we have this big, mostly black window here, mostly blank, essentially, with a button down here in the corner. Now, I don't really want it to be down there in the corner. For our purposes right now, I would like this button to fill the entire window. So, what's going on here? We've got our main widget, which is presumably this entire window. Within it we've got our box layout, and within that we've got our button. So we're going to need to change the size of something. Go here. Basically, what we need to do is change the size of the box layout. So if I want to change the size of the box layout, I do this. I say size, so make some space here, and I'm going to give it a size of root size. And before I explain exactly what that means, let me show you the effect. Run it, and aha, here we go. The button is filling the entire window with this big, huge, scary button. Great. Now, so why did that work? Well, basically, the box layout does not by default take on the size of this root widget here. I think you could say that layouts in general will not take on the size of a widget. While the button here, you notice I didn't have to change. I changed the size of the box layout to be the same size as the root widget, but I didn't have to change the button size. I didn't have to specifically say that I didn't have to specifically tell the button to fill the entire box layout, and that's because by default the button will fill as much space as possible, as will, say, a label widget or a text input widget. Now, root size, well, as we've been calling this the root widget, and that's what that means. It's root. If I refer to the root down here, if I say, if I refer to the root inside the buttons area down here, it's going to know that I'm talking about this main widget, the root widget. If I was to refer, let's just say, for instance, I was to specify the size of the button here, and I was to say self size. The self that I would be referring to here is the button itself. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because once I refer to self inside a widget's sort of property setting area here, I'm referring to that widget itself. If instead of root size here, I said self size, well, size equals self size. Self here refers to the box layout. So self here refers to the button. Self here refers to the box layout. Now, so you can see that self refers to the widget that you're currently dealing with here, if you see what I mean. However, even if I was to say root size here, it would know that I'm talking about the root widget. There is only one root widget. Self can refer to whatever the current widget is, whereas root always refers to the root widget. I could have other root widgets if I had other. There could be other root widgets here that refer to different things. We're not really going to deal with that in this tutorial. But then, if these root widgets had children, that's the terminology, as we've said, for main widget. Here's a container. Anything inside main widget are its children. Anything inside this box layout, that's the box layout's children. Any of the children inside this other root widget would, when they refer to root, they would, they would be referring to this widget. And the Kivy language knows that. We don't need to talk about that right now. And okay, there is one other keyword which we don't really need to discuss, but if I was to, for instance, put app size here, so we've talked about self, which refers to the current widget that you're inside, the root, which refers to the root widget, and then there's app. This isn't going to be useful to you right now, but it basically refers to the current app instance, which is the instance that we've returned by calling this. But we don't really need to talk about that at the moment. So I don't need that, and we'll set that back to root. Now, that was a bit of a tangent, but necessary. I'm going to add another few buttons here. So, just like this. Separate texts. Button 3. And button 4. Lovely. Okay, so now we've got 4 buttons. Let's just see what happens when we run this. Okay, before when we just had the one button, we had this one big button filling the screen because I had told the box layout to fill our root widget. Let's have a look here. Let's have a look at what happens. Okay, as you see, we do indeed have 4 buttons, but they seem to have automatically stacked themselves horizontally. Well, that is because, let me show you why that is. Box layout, this is what box layout does. It stacks its children in a linear fashion, but it has a setting called orientation, a property, called orientation, which can be set to either horizontal, which is it's at by default, as you can see, because I haven't set the orientation yet, so its default is horizontal. It's stacking them in a linear sort of fashion horizontally. However, you can change that setting, which I will do right now. I'll make it the first property that I set. Orientation and this needs to be a string. Let's change it to vertical. Okay, and run that and see what happens. And as you can see, we have now got our buttons stacked vertically, which is great, you know. But these buttons could be label widgets, they could be text inputs, they could be other layouts. These could all be box layouts themselves with their own children and with their own orientations. We could have a box layout here that stacks things horizontally. We could have a grid layout here, which we'll go into the other layouts later, but which does its own things. So you can see how you might build a widget tree in this way. How this one box layout that we have, these buttons inside could be the container for a whole tree of widgets and so forth. But let's see here. One more thing I'm going to go into with the box widget is, well, first of all, when we look at it, it's all very nice and everything, but it's all kind of very squashed together. So what can we do about that? Well, we have something called spacing. We'll go into units. This is just a very basic tutorial. I'll go into units, and because units can help with making sure that your apps look good on different size screens and all the rest. But I'm just going to give it a value of 20 for now, and run that, and let's see what happens. Oops, I didn't save that, so that's why nothing is happening. It should work. Okay, and as you can see, we got this nice space of 20 between each of our buttons. The buttons inside the box layout, which is in turn inside the main widget, the root widget here. So these buttons, which are the children of box layout, they're also the children of main widget, but they're the children of box layout. They now have a space between them of 20. But what if I want a little space between, say, the outside of my box layout here and my actual buttons themselves? Well, what I can do about that is a different setting called padding. And if any of you have done any web development, you're going to this is going to look quite familiar from CSS, for instance. It kind of does the same thing. What padding will do, well, I'll just run it and you'll see what it can do, is create a nice, see that nice black padding between the outside of our window and the buttons themselves. And this, to me anyway, this looks a lot better than when we had no spacing or no padding. And this is some very basic stuff here. And you'll see I'm just going to change the orientation again, back to horizontal. I could also do this by just erasing this line altogether because it's the default, but let's just have a look. And you'll see that this is what it looks like in a horizontal orientation. Here's our spacings now, here and here, and we've kept our padding too. So that's just some basic, and we could have 10 buttons in here, we could have 20 buttons in here. They would automatically resize themselves. In fact, let's do that. What I'll do is I'll just copy these and paste like so, and who cares if they all have the same text in them. So we'll just save that, and let's see what happens. And as you can see, they've all sort of resized themselves so that they're all of equal sizing. Now there is a way to give each of these their own. You can set it so that they take up. You can explicitly set the percentage of space that they take up. For instance, if you wanted button 3 to take, let's just say you had these. How many? We got 8 buttons here, and you wanted one of them to take up 30% of the width. You wanted one of them to take up 60%, etc., etc. That's very easily done. But that's for a slightly more advanced tutorial. This is just the basics of layouts. and this has been the box layout. So remember, it stacks its children in a sort of a linear fashion, horizontally like this by default, or vertically. You can set its size. In this case, we just set the size to the root size, which was the root widget. We also talked about self, the self keyword, which refers to the, if I wrote self here, for instance, it would refer to the current container here. We mentioned app, which refers to the app instance, but what we really need to just remember is self and root, what those two mean. We also talked about the spacing, which is the space between the children of a container, and the padding, which is the space between the children themselves, the outsides of the children themselves, and the container walls, let's say, or the border of the container. So next we're going to move on to grid layout.